So today we're going to talk a little bit about Road Atlanta. Historically, very significant racetrack in IMSA's history because it is the number 3 ranked track where the most IMSA ALMS Grand Am events have ever been run. Daytona is number 1, Sebring is number 2, Road Atlanta is number 3. It's also significant because it's probably one of the best existing natural terrain road courses in the world. It has been carved out of rolling hills by cutting dirt banks back, and when you look at imagery in the past, in the 70s and 80s, that's all there was a dirt bank, a straight cut dirt bank. So all you really needed to do to service the racetrack, well, you didn't need people with tires and guardrail and all that. You just needed a front end loader that you could cut the clay back, the red clay, which of course gets into everything and you can't wash it out anyway. But the track is spectacular, and today, thanks to Don Panoz's efforts in the late 90s to change it with the addition of the chicane before the bridge, it's probably remembered by most people for the significant and in some cases incredible accidents that have occurred there. There's been some really, really big crashes there. So in the mid-80s, by 85, 86, the GTP category of that era was running well over 200 miles an hour at most tracks, except places like Lime Rock and Sonoma, for instance, because there just wasn't enough straight pavement to do that in. But everywhere else, Mid-Ohio, Portland, even Laguna, before the inner loop of Laguna, 200 was hit there. Atlanta, Mid-Ohio, Road America, Watkins Glen, Daytona, Sebring. So the cars were getting faster and faster, and where they were getting faster is not just in speed, but in cornering speed, because of ground effects. Cars had ground effects. They had full tunnels. They weren't little diffusers. They were full tunnels. And some of them, by the late 80s, were making 75. We're having to run 7,000 to 8,000 pound rear springs to keep the cars off of the pavement. That's how much downforce they could create at 180 miles an hour. So, with that said, you needed a lot of power. So, yeah, they all had 1,000 horsepower, 900 horsepower, 1,200 horsepower, depending on what brand you had. So the cars got faster and faster. And the nature of the track, with the big grade change on what is, on paper, looks like a straightaway, the big back straightaway, was actually got a huge dip in the middle of it, which is still there, which leads into the current chicane that's there. That part of the track was 205, 209 miles an hour with huge downforce and huge loading because you're going downhill into a dip. And there were a lot of crashes there because of tire failures, not because the tires were bad, but because they simply, the car and the pavement terrain change created levels of stress that the tires in the cars simply weren't built for. In fact, they actually ground them into the pavement. The 7,000 pound springs didn't work well enough. So there were some big crashes in the early 90s, which prompted, at some point, I mean, it prompted by 94 with the demise of the old GTP car to the world sports car, a flat bottom, way less powerful car, 600 horsepower car instead of a 1,000 horsepower car. No ground effects, just standard aerodynamic downforce balance with wings and things like that, but no tunnels, no diffuser, no nothing. So that alleviated that for a while, but then as they got into the late 90s and the Le Mans versions of those cars with diffusers and with other elements that were beginning to increase that speed again, you saw the Porsche GT1 car flipped on the back straightaway. Don Panoz came in. He did 2 really good things. One was changing the layout of the track in that section, made it much more comfortable for the type of cars of the era of 2000 onwards to today. And then the other thing was the new pit lane. The inside pit lane was not there. That was built over the stream, and that hill behind it was cut back significantly. A lot of dirt was moved to build that pit lane, because the outside pit lane is small, very small. So for big endurance races of Petit Le Mans type is not really what was needed. You needed to have that changed, and Mr. Panoz's ownership let that happen correctly. And then, after that, it's not been a problem anymore because the track and the cars are quite compatible. It's consequential because In a lot of places, you don't have a lot of room to recover if you do make a mistake, as there are at Watkins Glen and a lot of other places. That's not unique there. But the terrain change, the up and down the hills, it's probably, everybody talks about the corkscrew at Laguna and how great that is. I'm telling you what, you get under that bridge looking down that hill into the last corner of Road Atlanta with a building in front of you, it's a lot more daunting than the corkscrew. You fall off the hill just the same, but you got a building right in front of you, so you got to make that turn. So it's a really great place, and it's a great place to watch races because of what it is. And it's nice that it's pretty much the way it was when it was built. But overall, the racing there has always been spectacular. I mean, it didn't matter whether it was Firestone, Firehawk, showroom stock cars, or GTP cars, or GT cars, or whatever, it's always been good. The fact that it retains the character, the elevation changes, the different radiuses of corners, the S's. The thing about the track is there's a lot of great racetracks, but a lot of them share a lot of radiuses that are this track. Just about every corner is different, which makes it so challenging to the people that drive it. I know a lot of the European drivers come over here and relish these kind of racetracks because they're challenging. You have to be on your game. So the funny thing about the pavement, I'll get back to that, but the owners at the time, turn 7, which is the turn that takes you onto the back straightaway, and then the last turn, which is down the hill after the bridge right at the tower, both of those were beginning to unravel, so they decided to repave it. So they repaved it, but they repaved it a little bit short on the in and the out. Just cut that section of track out, put new pavement in, good to go. So we show up, I think it was 83, and we show up, and it's the sort of first generation of GTP cars, Lola T600s, Marches. Well, all of a sudden we had what a lot of people didn't really understand was ground effects with tunnel cars. Well, after about a day and a half of practice, the cars had managed to take the entire piece of pavement, not just parts of it, and slide it back from the curb about a foot from the lateral G's that these cars could create in both places. It was not fixable, so we had to put cones in the ditch that developed between the concrete curb and where the asphalt ended up before it was originally stuck to the curb. It did stay there. But the whole thing got pushed to the side. So we had to change the whole radius of that corner by putting stuff there so people wouldn't fall in the ditch. So that just tells you how, as the cars developed, how much the track became more consequential because the cars simply got faster and faster, right? Always great crowds. It's a track that over the years has always had fans of Road Atlanta. They go to Road Atlanta for bikes. They go to Road Atlanta for historics. They go to Road Atlanta for IMSA. They go to Road Atlanta for Road Atlanta. And they still do, as you can see when you get there for the 10-hour this year. The other interesting tidbit or item about the track is the fact that it's really, when it was built, it was truly out in the woods. I mean, it was a drive out of Atlanta to get to Road Atlanta, okay? And of course, if you go there today, it's virtually now surrounded by communities and towns, and it's just a completely different environment. But I can remember going there. We always went in the spring, and spring was always dogwood time in that part of the world. And all the trees, dogwood trees, would be blooming. It was kind of like the cherry blossoms in Washington. For IMSA, it was the dogwoods at Road Atlanta in April. So, and the other cool thing was in 1974, which was the height of the fuel crisis of that time following another Mideast war, there was no Daytona or Sebring that year because there was no fuel in Florida for spectators to buy. It's those of you who can remember it, you had odd days and even days depending on the last number of your license plate, and those were the only days you could buy fuel nationwide. So there wasn't enough fuel in Florida to encourage people to come to the races. It wasn't about the fuel that the race would use. It was about the people coming and going, being able to buy fuel when they needed it. So there was no 24-hour and there was no 12-hour. So the very first race of 1974 was the 12 hours of Sebring for 6 hours at Road Atlanta. It was pretty much what it was called. So we did a 6-hour, called it a 12-hour, but only ran 6 hours and did it at Road Atlanta. And at the time, the chairman and the president of the track was Arthur Montgomery, if I recall, who was the chairman of Coca-Cola, was one of the primary owners. But, you know, the track and the various people who've promoted events as the promoter there, and there's been numbers of them over the years, has always just put on a great spectacle. It's a great place to go. It's a great racetrack to watch. It's a great place to go and watch from different places. And a lot of the places you are still physically a lot closer to the racetrack and the cars, and get that full experience because of that, because of the nature of the track. The up and down of the hills, the proximity of the spectator areas being raised above the track surface, so you're up above looking down. The bridge, the front straightaway, the downhill, every part of the track has got excellent visibility and viewing, outside and inside. And over the years lately, more and more of it used to be a jungle there in the middle, and they've slowly began to clear a lot of that out for two reasons. One, as development has occurred around it, it's displaced a lot of wildlife, and there's always been deer and everything else running around in the woods out there, which of course come out on the racetrack. But as you cut the brush out, it makes it a lot safer from that standpoint. The animals don't go into the inside of the track and then try and get spooked to get out. So that's changed a lot. And what's really cool is right now, people, when we get there, people are lined up at the gate to go in like Monday, which is just like Sebring, Daytona, and other great events. The 10-hour race is now certainly a fixture of endurance racing worldwide, certainly one of the anchors of the IMSA endurance program. So here we are leaving the original pit lane, which still exists today, and going into turn one. And turn one is essentially identical to the way it was. The barrier, as you can see, is a lot closer than it is today. That's been moved back and a gravel trap put in. You can see the dirt on the left is where people used to go off pretty regularly, and growing grass there became relatively impossible. This section of the track remains identical to the way it was. Better curbing on the right here, down through the S's. Again, a lot of red dirt from people doing their best to mow the grass on a regular basis, but basically this is the layout from its original design all the way through 3 as we just passed into the S's here. And as you come up here, again, still the same. Again, barriers are now in place, wall, better spectator protection. You can see the earth banks on the right being essentially the main barrier for the racetrack as opposed to a wall or guardrail. Some sections of guardrail on the low parts. But pretty much a piece of asphalt going through the woods, and as mentioned earlier, kind of cut out of the hills. This is 6 and 7. 7 being the location where the pavement was moved, I think the following year from when this was made, away from the curb there. Then down the straightaway, and this of course is the biggest part where the speed began to approach by the mid-80s, 200 plus miles an hour. The first part of the straightaway is fairly benign, other than, again, there's really no solid barrier other than the earth bank on the right. And again, this was kind of standard for the era. You know, this is early 80s. Things were a lot different than they are today, obviously, but now we're coming up to the part that was for sure the most daunting in big cars at that time, which is this portion here going into this dip. At this point, GTP cars were right at 200 plus miles an hour, and the compression that occurred in this dip, and then the dramatic rise to the bridge at an angle, which of course a bunch of people bounced off the left side of the bridge abutment over the years. And then as you come down the hill, again, there's not a whole lot on driver's left to get into the pit entrance. And again, the barrier and the building location is somewhat different today than what was originally there. And now we're on the front straightaway.